Welcome to Affordable Foundations, Legacy Impact Through Housing, the podcast that explores how housing shapes communities and creates lasting legacies. I'm your host, Cecilia Casio, and each week we'll dive deep into solutions, challenges, and opportunities in affordable, attainable, and workforce housing. From current housing models to innovative approaches reshaping the industry, we'll explore the policies, investment strategies, and community-driven initiatives that are making a real impact. Housing isn't just about buildings, it's about people, opportunity, and the future we're creating together. We believe everyone plays an important role in affordable housing, whether you're a real estate investor, developer, policymaker, property manager, or someone passionate about creating positive change. Affordable Foundations is your go-to source for insights and inspiration. So let's break barriers, redefine possibilities, and build a legacy together. Hello, and welcome to Affordable Foundations, Legacy Impact Through Housing, part of the Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Cecilia Casio, and today we're honored to have Keith L. Gregory, Director of Planning and Development at the Housing Authority of Kansas City. With over 2 decades in leadership in affordable housing, from Chicago to Tucson to Kansas City, Keith has managed nearly $1 billion in funding and played a pivotal role in creating thousands of housing units nationwide. Keith, welcome to the show. And let's start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure and an honor, especially when I get to talk about myself. You don't get to do that a lot in this industry. So, but no, this is a great show. So thank you so much. Like you said, I've been doing this around 20 years, a little bit more than that. I started my career in Pittsburgh with the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh, kind of bounced around all over the country. I've been in Alaska, been in Arizona, been down in Atlanta, down the Georgia area, been in Chicago in the Midwest. So I've had good fortune of being everywhere. And, I consider myself really lucky. This is really, really amazing work. When I tell people, kind of how I got into this, the best part about this work is that you can make yourself a good living, but you also get to help people. And not every job lets you do that. And for me, it's a little bit more special. My mother grew up in public housing in Louisville, Kentucky. So, there's this connection to the entire idea of affordable housing that's really critical to me. I understand what it means to people to have this resource be available and have it be a good resource, have it be good quality housing that people can live in. But yeah, I've been, kind of all over the place, all over the country. I've worked for Native American tribes where I was able to develop some really large and impactful housing projects there. I've run housing authorities in Aurora, Illinois, and some other places, but found my way here to Kansas City, and I'm enjoying the barbecue and the jazz. And apparently I'm going to be a Chiefs fan. Everybody here tells me that. So, but, it's one of those things. I'm excited to see if they can convince me,
A Chiefs fan, well, I'm a Cowboy fan, so we'll just leave it there.
Oh, okay. Well, listen, I don't have any allegiances yet, so we'll have to get me there still.
So you mentioned that your mother was on housing. Is that correct?
That's true.
And
yes.
Is that kind of where your passion grew for this industry, or?
So yes and no. When I got into this, it was like a lot of people do. It was on accident. I was looking for work in Pittsburgh. I was working for a place that was laying people off. So I was looking for work. I had applied at the Housing Authority. They called, offered me a job. I knew nothing really about the business of a housing authority. I really only kind of understood it. The Housing Authority owned what we called back then the projects, right? So that's what I knew. I didn't know much more about it than that. And as I got into the business and got the job, I would tell my mom, "Oh yeah, I got this job. It's with the Housing Authority." And then, I knew she grew up in public housing, but I didn't understand the connection between the Housing Authority and public housing. So she really gave a lot of backstory and a lot of history about just what it was like and the programs and the old property managers that she knew and all that stuff. So it really built a real love for what we do. And especially as I met the residents, as you get to a place where you're out in the field, you get to meet the residents, you really do understand how important it is. And then it becomes, to me, it always became, how can we make this resource better for people? How can we improve it? How can we build more of it, and have more families be able to utilize it? So the passion comes from a place of both my family's history, but also just wanting people to have, the best that they could possibly have.
Yeah. Let's talk about the families and kind of what you've seen. As I had stated to you, I was I don't think I said this part, but I was the president of a management company, and part of our portfolio was HUD units. So
Mhm.
some of them were layered with tax credit, but most of them were HUD units. So, here's a private owner where they had contract, and you have 300 units in one area, 250 in
Mhm.
another, and um, affordable from tax credit to HUD has always been in my heart. And one of the great things for me is when I see a family, as we talk about generational cycles in these, programs, right? But when you see the family members graduating, going to the
Yeah.
military, and you see grandma there, and grandma, she lives in one apartment, mom lives in another, but then you see these kids as they start growing and,
Mhm.
and going and doing life.
Yeah.
Um, that is what it's about to me. It's
Yeah.
how, when you mentioned being out in the field, tell me a little bit about what you experience when you go out there or when you've been out there.
For me now, it's a lot more of, development work, right? So I'm out in the field, I'm looking at properties like, okay, are we going to redevelop this one? And, is the neighborhood good for this? Or do we want to go find some land somewhere? But earlier in my career, I spent time as I came from the finance side of the business. So I was an accountant and a budget manager, director of finance, and then I became an executive director. And that's really where I got to interacting with the residents and getting to know the residents on a personal basis. And really, as to your point, you see, if you're there long enough, you see some of the kids grow up. You see them go to high school, you see them go to college, you see them come back from college and
Mhm.
get jobs. And so really when you start to hang around long enough to see those progressions, you really do start to understand kind of how important it is that this resource exists. But even on the development, side, when we go out and talk to families and they tell us what their needs are, you see the family and you say, okay, you're in this 4-bedroom unit. There are 5 people in this home. Is it big enough? Is it laid out in a way that makes sense? Because I think a lot of what we have now is housing stock that is good quality bones of housing stock, but it's not designed for a 21st century family.
Yep.
And that's challenging. We have units that a lot of times were built in the 60s, 70s, even older, and they're just not built to the modern standard. So you put a family in those units, and it's not that they're in a bad place. It's just that they could be in a better place. And
Yeah.
and I constantly talk to families and ask, okay, what would make this unit better? What would make this community better? Would it be better if your building faced more sunlight, or is it better that it doesn't? I'm always curious about what makes an apartment or house, whatever, feel like home, and what will make it even better for the individual. So it's really about, really just understanding people at a personal level and trying to really address their
Yeah.
individual needs through whatever part you play in this whole puzzle of affordable housing.
Yeah. Because when we look at this, we talk about the individual needs. And while we can't focus on just one family, the bottom line is we deal with all families.
Yeah.
And there are patterns of needs there.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that I see is experiences. When you go to a 80% property in comparison to a 30% property, the experiences that those children have are not really balanced out.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so, what kind of programs, and this wasn't one of the questions we sent you, but like, what kind of programs have you seen? And I know you're on the development
Mhm.
side, but do you have any feedback or recommendations on programs that you see make an impact? I know what I have seen in my time as property and asset management, but I've never looked at um, it from the lens of the housing agencies. I was on the private side, so
Sure.
I
Yeah.
just want to get some feedback there.
So 2 programs that I think are super impactful for residents are the Ross and the FSS program. So both of them are available through Housing Authority. Don't ask me what the acronyms mean. I think FSS is Family Self-Sufficiency. Ross is Resident Opportunities and Self-Sufficiency, I think. I could entirely be wrong on that last one, and everybody in my industry is going to make fun of me when they see this because I said it wrong. But the Ross and the FSS programs are truly resident focused. They are not about, most of the programs that we have, whether it's, RAD or any other section, the Housing Choice Voucher, any of the programs that we run are truly run from the perspective of the Housing Authority. They are very much Housing Authority driven in that we administer the programs, we control the programs. We are the sole point of contact for the residents. We really drive, and for HUD for that matter, and we really drive those programs. Where FSS and Ross are about the residents. It's really about asking residents what do they need and how can we help you get what you need to go on to be self-sufficient. So I think when we think about programs for residents, Ross and FSS are just huge. And I think it's unfortunate that, some of those programs have been cut over the years just because they actually serve the goals that I think most of the, politicians have, which is to help more people move through the affordable housing system as opposed to staying. Both of those programs are designed to help families gain self-sufficiency. So I think really those are just amazing programs that are really individually tailored. We talk to the families, we ask them what it is that they need to be self-sufficient, and then we help them attain that. So really, Ross and FSS are I think the most impactful programs that I could think of off the top of my head that are for residents.
Yeah. And when you talk about the needs of the families as a developer, what kind of questions do you ask? Because I think that's really important, and I am not being critical of any developers, so please understand this. But one of my biggest challenges is, how do you know what a family needs if you've never had to live in that type of environment?
Yeah. So my perspective on development is that we aren't developing affordable housing. We're developing housing. It just happens that we're pricing it affordably. And so in any development that I've done and that I do, I don't approach it and say, well, how would this family who's in affordable housing, what do they need? I look at it and say, what would I put in a market rate apartment? I don't really ask the question differently. I just say, okay, if I was building market rate luxury apartments, what would I put in them? I'd put in granite countertops. I'd put in hardwood floors. I'd put in brand new cabinets with the big pantry doors. I'd add a garage and an accent wall. I would do all of those things. So when I do a development, and this is just me personally, I don't want to speak for, I'm not saying anything negative about anybody else. Everybody's got their reasons for why they do it the way they do it. But my approach is, when I think of where I would want to live, that's what I would put in, any apartment or any complex, any development that I'm building. I start there. Now, funding is what it is. You can't always put the hardwood floors or the granite countertops in, but where you can, you do. And you try to make these indistinguishable from any other apartment anywhere else in the city, because I think that's a disservice. I think hilarious. I think I may have just recently made a LinkedIn post about this very thing. You often see developers build buildings and, they're boxes and, they're gray on the outside and white on the inside. And you're like, okay. And then I'm saying, affordable housing is important. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It is important wherever, and whoever is doing it is applauds them for doing it. But
Right.
There's, I think, a better way to do it. Some of the projects we did for the Pasquayaki tribe, we did, we went as far as we could. Exterior styling with the balconies, the colors, the color palettes we used, the interiors with, dishwashers and sink disposals and good tile floors and laminate vinyl, the luxury vinyl tiles. All of those things went into that. And what it took was, it's not that a lot of those things cost more. It's really that you have to be intentional about putting them in there. You don't save a whole lot of money going with cheaper countertops. You don't
Right.
save a whole lot of money going with cheaper floors or bathroom fixtures or appliances. But you will make a huge difference in how someone feels when they walk in that door if you put in some stainless steel and if you put in some granite or if you throw in some color. So I talk to people when I can, say, what would you like? What do you need? But I look at all the luxury places that are going up, all the apartments that get built, in any community. And I say, okay, what are they doing? Let's just do that. There's really no good reason not to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to go off a little bit on a different subject. Not say a different subject, but gonna kind of tier that a little differently as well. So I love that mindset because you want to provide that sense of pride, that sense of experience, because it's things that they may not have been able to live in before. And in seeing my 30% projects, I think about the families that don't have dressers,
Yeah.
the families that don't have beds. They may have a mattress, but they don't have a bed frame.
Yeah, there were times I
Uh,
didn't have a bed frame. So
yeah, well,
with college, after college, I don't know that I had a bed frame either. So
no, the families that don't have a table, but you walk in and you know that, the functional space is there for, I mean, there's some functionality, but I always say, like, how much more would it cost us to build a table?
yeah,
How much more would it cost us to put in benches along the walls, or, a platform bed? I
mhm,
know, like, that may be like a fantasy thought process, but cubbies in the closets,
yeah,
I just remember my units that would get inspected, and if the clothes wasn't folded, if they didn't have, dressers, it would be in baskets, in the
yeah.
closet or whatever. And I'm like, what if we built cubbies in here
You-
for people to put their clothes in? Because, you know, a lot of these families, they can't afford
yeah,
furniture.
yeah,
And when I'm told, well, they get plenty of resources, well, that doesn't mean that they want to go ask for those resources.
absolutely.
I think there's this misconception there on some of this, but I just think when I talked earlier about developers that would be building, if they've never lived in that environment, it's hard to understand what they need.
It is, and there are definitely a lot of stereotypes come into play in these conversations, and look, developers as a group of people, we all tend to be individuals who did not usually, I don't say all, a lot of us did not come from a background that would have exposed us to
Hmm.
this. A lot of developers have lived a life, got to go to college, got to have a job after college, had their first apartment, first car, first house, had all of those kind of traditional, stereotypical American dream experiences, right? And so it is a little difficult sometimes to imagine some of the things that other people don't necessarily have access to or haven't had exposure to. So sometimes you get into conversations with people who by all means are out to do the right thing. They're developing affordable housing. They know it's needed, but they don't always understand why it's needed or what parts of it are critical. It's not just the four walls. It really, to your point, is what's in the four walls. If you can make things more available, if I can build in an island where people can sit, well, guess what? They don't have to buy a table now. So
Right.
it's exactly what you're saying. If I do all the closets and we build in the storage hardware, that's just one less thing. Maybe they don't get a dresser, but now they've got some box areas where they can put socks and pants and
Yep.
shirt. So yeah, being thoughtful about, how we build things and being, again, intentional about how we do it can make a big difference in how people are able to really benefit, right,
Yeah.
from the units. I always love, I've been in there are certain developers that are really good at it, or certain, individuals on their development team who are just really good at seeing a space and visualizing it. And that's
Hmm.
not my expertise. I have to hire people that can do that. But,
Right.
where they can really experience it from looking at it, they can say, okay, we have this here and we have that there. And it makes such a big difference when people come in and they're just like, oh, great. I just need, two chairs. I don't have to buy a whole dining room set. Like you said, there's a bay window. I can actually sit at the bay window if I want to and catch
Right.
light. I don't need a table. So you're right. There are definitely things that get missed if you either don't have the experience or don't have the sight necessary to really see what's possible.
We're bringing people from the industry that are directly related in the industry that see some of the needs. I think that's really important. Talking to residents on different housing assets and kind of hearing really listening to what they need,
Yeah.
talking to teachers and seeing what, they say, especially when those developments are near, you've got 300 units of HUD-based asset, then you can go talk to the teachers and they can tell
Hmm.
you some of the needs much better than somebody like me, because they see those kids in their each and every day.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely. Yeah.
that's really important. And the goal is to make a legacy impact on these children where they have different experiences.
Yeah, at the
So,
end of the day, we want to build that. It's kind of bad to say it, but it's just kind of the truth. Really, the goal is and should be to build things that a family lives in briefly.
mhm,
You build amazing things and wonderful things they can be proud of while they're there, but also you want to build the programs around them so that they're not there forever. So that, but
right.
on their own terms. Like we don't want them we say you have to get out, but we also want them to have the resources surrounding them to help them for whatever it is that they decide to do. I mean, some people
Yeah.
might want to stay forever, and that's great. But for those who desire to take, that next step, we want to make sure that they have access to that. And the
Yeah.
building counts towards that.
Well, in teaching the children on these programs, and I say all children, right? But like these programs really is financial literacy. What does
Oh
that
yeah.
really mean?
Yeah.
Because struggling families, whether you're on a program or not, if all you see is struggle, then you don't really have a sense on how to multiply money. You don't
Mhm.
understand what that really means, and it sets them back some time. And I just think it's one of those things that I know that if we could make an impact there with the kids, for generations to come,
Yeah.
you'll start seeing the difference in the generational wealth gap.
You're absolutely right. And I think that's where, developers have a role to play. And I think a lot of times we think we just build buildings like, oh, I found some land, I'm building a building. But the reality is where that building goes, the mixture of units in that building. So I do a lot of mixed income, mixed use kind of developments so that it's not just affordable housing. Not every single person in there isn't at 30% or 40%. You have some people in there that are not, 120%, 150%, that are
Right.
true market rate renters. And it creates a community. But to your point, I think everybody's kind of heard this by now. You can't really be what you haven't ever seen. Right.
Yep.
So when you have kids who get to see somebody else who lives in their building who their dad or mom is a doctor or is a, architect or, is a teacher, all of a sudden these things become real because you knew somebody who did it.
Yep.
So you know that that's possible. If you don't ever see people who do a thing, then they're just things that you hear about on TV and they're not real.
Yeah.
So it is important. I also think it's important as developers that we select much more carefully the areas where we build. Right? It's very, land is cheap in certain areas, so we're like, oh, I'll just grab this land and I'll get some tax credits and I'll put up a building. And yes, that's one way to do it. But the reality is, if you truly want to help families, it's about opportunity. Help, find land in better school districts, find land in areas that have more job opportunities, areas that are, a little bit higher income where, again, exposure can happen, where the families get to shop at a grocery store that has more healthy food options and
Hmm.
school district has more resources to provide the kids aftercare. All the different things, it really does matter. And I think developers need to be more aware of the impact that we have on families before the family even shows up. And I don't think we all always appreciate that. I know even when I started, I was like, oh yeah, we're just buying some property and we're turning into something else. And you don't always think through the long term. When people come complain, they're like, well, there's not a grocery store for 5 miles. I have to have a car. And I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. And then
Yeah.
they're like, the school up the street is, it's a poorly rated school, but now we have to go there because, this is the only place we can afford to live. And I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense too. So you have to, I think through experience, you become more aware of some of those challenges and you try to be more intentional about, the placement and just kind of some of the things that you get involved in development.
Yeah. That is so true. That takes me to my next question. What are the most critical stages in affordable housing development process, and where do you see the greatest challenges?
Well, so I am forever complaining about lack of creativity. And when I say that, I say it in the sense that I think a lot of people who develop affordable housing immediately run to HUD and immediately run the tax credits. That's the only possible way to do this is tax credits. And if HUD gives me money, right, or if the state gives me money, it's the only way I'll ever do it. The reality is, though, that's not the only way to do it, right? We spend as developers, and there's nothing wrong with tax credits. I want to make that clear because I use them. I don't want to be hypocritical, right? So, tax credits serve a great purpose. They have created more affordable housing than I think any other form of, federal subsidy other than the original 1937 Act, right? They are an amazing resource and they are huge as to how new affordable housing gets developed. I just think that's not the only way to do it. I think if you're looking at your pro forma and you're, developing a market rate product in downtown Kansas City, I feel like you can afford to take 20% of your units and lower the price some. And I don't think that kills your pro forma. Yes, it does. A lot of our developers are profit driven. I get that. And you've got investors that you're responsible to who want their money. I understand that. But I think, the biggest challenge is really just our own internal lack of creativity. We just go for what we know, right? We're just going to do tax credits, but there's only so many tax credits. We all can't use them at the same time. So
Right.
it's really being creative about that. But it's also the realities of the world, right? Stuff's expensive.
Yeah.
It's hard to really do a lot. Like I'd spent, some time in California. I think I spent the first 2 months just closing my jaw about how expensive things are. We're at $500,000 and $600,000 per affordable unit. It's insane. And, and the time it takes to do it. And that's not any, it's not any negative on California. It's an amazing state, but it's just the price and the time that it takes to do things makes it almost impossible to do them. And you go to other places and they have other challenges. And so it's kind of like trying to find a way to address development costs and construction costs. And unfortunately, because we use tax credits a lot, tax credits, at least for the time being, still hang on to the Davis-Bacon wages. That wage scale adds anywhere from 10 to 30% on a project, not to mention the environmentals and all the things that we have to do because we're taking federal money that, the developer that's doing a luxury deal up the street, they don't do any of that. They go get their money, they build their building. And it's amazing to me that they're going to turn around and charge $3,000 a month for something that costs me more to build than it costs them. And I'm going to charge less. So I just think it's kind of funny. But no, I think, creativity is important. And when I say that, I mean creativity in how we approach our projects, right? And then also just, the environment, which is not, anything anybody can do about, just the cost of doing these kinds of projects. America as a country has a housing crisis. And we're not going to lie tech our way out of it. It's going to take more than just affordable housing. We have to really look at, is it a supply issue or is it an affordability issue? And I think it's a combination of the two. And, there just needs to be more housing, period, of all incomes, all across the spectrum.
Those are all great points, and thank you for that insight because it has to also be like it's got to be profitable as well,
Yeah.
and it's hard for developers that are out there trying to make a profit. Like they want to develop, but can't really lose money on the deal. So making those numbers work is really, I think people don't even get started because when they start working on the numbers, there's a hiccup. So I'm
Mhm.
glad you're saying be creative, and that can mean a lot of different things, right? How do you capital stack? How do you,
Yeah.
site select? Is there something that you could do differently? Permitting, all of it. And all those are risk points.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all the parts, right? I mean, the development process is not, as I tell people all the time, developers don't get paid to build buildings. Everybody thinks that what we do. Like, oh, you just go out and you buy something, you build something. No, we get paid to take that building from somebody's brain to bricks on the ground and all of the things that go in between that, from site selection, to your point, to getting your money together, to, first plan set with the city, second plan set with the city, permit approval, you're going through all the zoning, all of these steps. And then depending on the community, I mean, you got community meetings and you got to convince a neighborhood that your development isn't going to ruin their property values, even though their property values weren't great in the first place. Like, you have all of these things that you have to do. That's what developers are supposed to do. That's what we do. We're not builders. We're not out here, with hammers. We're not accountants either. We're not sitting in a room, punching out numbers. We're all of that. We are facilitators. It's just that we facilitate one of the more complicated things that gets done in this country, and it shouldn't be complicated. But city zoning and city permitting and plan approval, all of these processes require a skill set and a team of people that understand how to get it done. And that's then we started on all the lawyers that are needed to do these anymore. But I just think that it's not an impossible problem, right? Developers, and I think we also get stuck on the idea of the big developer. We get stuck on the idea that a developer is this company, this individual who does multi-million-dollar projects all the time. And every deal is $1 million and they make all this money on every deal. A developer is somebody that picks a piece of property and builds something on it, or buys a house and fixes it up. That person's a developer just as much as I am. And, then we need the developers that do duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes, and we need to incentivize them to do affordable housing as well. If we did that, I think that's probably, if there's anything that's really missing, it's incentives for the everyday small developers. Like I have the luxury of the backing of a housing authority with a, probably $100 million budget, annual budget, right? There are a lot of luxuries that come with that. I can afford to have an off day. I can afford to pick a site and not love that site. There's just I have access to attorneys and accountants and consultants and specialists. And there's a bunch of money out there. There's tax credits and all this stuff that I can use. But if I wanted to develop just a 4-unit duplex and I wanted those to be affordable housing, that is immensely and multitudes harder than what I do every day. So we really do need to consider those small everyday developers who are just buying a house, flipping a house one at a time, because that's where I think we're really missing an affordability opportunity.
I'm glad you said that. This is not part of our conversation, but it's part of what I work on and some of my partners work on. So, I'm involved in some fix and flips and being able to invest into that. And not only I get a return, but then you see this house being sold to somebody that can actually, buy a home because it's at an affordable price range. I'm currently looking at a couple of lots, and it's to build 16 to 18 townhomes.
Nice.
It was approved for homes, and now we're shifting to townhomes. So, I'm looking to see how that number is going to work out. And I totally agree with you. Like there are not a lot of incentives for the smaller developers. But you know what? Where there's a will, there's a way, and what's meant to be will be, right? So you got to keep pushing forward. And that's what I tell my listeners: just keep pushing forward, figure it out, be creative, without being irresponsible.
Yes, and whether it's big housing developers, small housing developers, that's important, right? You have to think outside the box. You have to be creative, but to your point, you can't be irresponsible for a variety. Just personal, self-preservation, but also just when you're developing housing, you have to realize that you're developing something that people count on. Like if they're paying you rent, or if they're buying this from you, they expect it to last. They expect it to be there. And, so when we're building these things, we have to be mindful of the fact that it's not just, I'm not putting a McDonald's in here. And if I foreclose on, if I default on my loan and McDonald's just moves, this is a family that may not have the money to move. I rent a place right now. I don't know, somebody told me, oh, well, we kind of lost a place. You got to move. We're like, what do you mean? Like, I don't want to deal with that. Right. So it really is important, to your point, to really be mindful and make sure that what you're doing the right way, whether it's the construction, the financing, make it all right so that it lasts.
Yes, that is key. And sometimes can be a lost art because we have such a desire to get things done that we need to go back to the foundations, to the basics of what we're doing and why. And that goes for, even if you're creating or building a market, asset, that's irrelevant. It's really about responsibility to the community, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that is just my personal opinion.
I agree 100%. I absolutely agree.
Well, and being with the housing agency, how do you guys measure success beyond the number of units or vouchers that y'all distribute? How
You
is
know,
that measured?
I think it's it's kind of hard to answer that question in a direct way. And the reason for that is because housing authorities, and I think, a lot of people don't always know this, housing authorities are really multifaceted organizations. So success on the housing choice voucher side is exactly what you're saying. It's the number of families that have access to that resource, the number of units that are occupied, that people are leasing, and that, where everybody's getting paid, the landlords are happy, everybody's winning, right? Public housing, which we still have we have about 1,100 units of old style public housing, is a little different because we're the landlord. So now it's the metrics are the same as they would be if we were a private landlord. Is occupancy at 95% or better? Is rent collection at 98% or better? Conditions of the units, are the units in good conditions? Are we hitting our maintenance work orders? Are we turning those over in 24 hours, 48 hours? How long is it taking? Unit turns. So there are metrics for success that are different. As a developer, honestly, it's kind of a very weird thing to say out loud because I work in affordable housing, because I work for a housing authority. But the reality of housing authority affordable development is, are we making money? And are the developments getting built timely, on budget, all that kind of stuff? Are we addressing the needs of the community? Like here in Kansas City, our administration, our mayors look for 10,000 new units of affordable housing. So are we helping to meet that mission and meet that goal? But it is a very strange thing to say that, how much developer fee did we make last year? That's one of my performance metrics is what is our developer fee income for each year? And are we hitting those numbers? Because that money pays for some of the other stuff that goes on. It pays for our resident services group and pays for some of the things that go on in other departments. So every department at a housing authority has different goals that are all part of this broader mission to provide affordable housing, right? So even finance, they have to make sure that all the accounting is done properly, our audits are clean, and HUD's happy with our reporting so that they keep giving us money. So it all plays a role. And I think, but if you wanted to boil it down, at the end of the day, I think the most important metrics are we helping the same number of families or more than we did last year? Are we doing so successfully? Are those families successful? And by successful for us, we mean, are they going to get job training? Are they comfortable in their units? Are they moving into home ownership? Those kinds of things. And then are we being responsible with the taxpayer money that we're being given? Because that's the other piece. Our money's taxpayer money. So we can't afford to be loose with it. We can't afford to not be on top of every dollar, every dime, because it's not our money. People have entrusted us to use their money for an important goal. So we have to make sure that we're doing so and we're being responsible fiscally. So I think really it's those are kind of the big ticket items. But there are so many things that, are important to us. We want to help those families reach home ownership, reach self-sufficiency. I want to develop the most amazing affordable housing project in all of America, right? So, we all, there's all kinds of metrics, but I think those are kind of the most critical ones.
I love that you say you have to be responsible for the taxpayer money, because as a someone who raises capital, I tell people I am responsible for other people's money, and I treat it as if it's my grandchildren's future, because it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is their future. So, being responsible for other people's money is, to me, just like the ultimate, and it's a blessing. I'm grateful that I get that opportunity, and I take that so seriously. So thank you for sharing that, because that's an equivalent to what I feel
Agreed,
is important.
Yeah, it's a contract of trust, and it's a trust with the broader community. I mean, it's one of those things, and I always hate to see, a housing authority or any government organization, not just house, school district, hospital, whatever, that had fraud or had people take advantage, just because, when you think about it, and you're like, okay, but it's not like if it was my money and I wasted it, that's, oh well, but it's not. There are people who worked hard and paid their taxes, and they expect us to do the right thing with their money. So it's important that we do that.
And in the development side, along with just overall the management side, I think sometimes we come across hurdles because we are so accustomed to, we've always done it that way. We've always done it that way.
Yeah.
I shifted that line for my team members when I was with my last company, because I was like, yeah, Kat, we're not going to use that line anymore. Like, how much more efficient can we do it? What can we do differently to improve the process, right? You've got
Absolutely.
that 4350, it is what it is. We can't change that manual, right? But like, let's figure out the most efficient way to do what we can do within those parameters, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and
So,
that's always a challenge, right?
yeah.
Because housing authorities are notorious. I mean, and I'm not coming down on anybody. We do it here. I've heard it at pretty much every agency I've been at. You ask the question, okay, well, why do we do this? And we've always done it that way. Like, did anybody, like, how long have we always done it? Like, forever, as long as I've been here. How have you been here? 30 years. Okay. So maybe it's time to take another look at this, right? So, I always kind of laugh at our processes. We have so much paper, right? And I'm just like, do we still have to do this with paper? Like, I'm pretty sure that I've gotten a mortgage on my phone before. Like, so
Yeah.
the idea that I have to do some of these things on paper, I'm just like, but why? Why are we doing this? But, there's, to your point, we don't want to accept the status quo. We want to continue to push, continue to do better, and continue to be, the more efficient, saves more money, allows us to do more housing. And that's,
And,
kind of the
it
goal.
makes people uncomfortable sometimes because they're so
Yes.
accustomed to doing something a certain way. But I always, when I do my coaching and consulting, I tell people, like, hey, I understand it's a housing agency, but this is somebody's money.
Yeah.
And if you were out in the private world, you would have to explain a budget overage.
Yep.
Then that's the way you need to run it. And that's the way you need to look at it, because either the budget wasn't done correctly, or, there was a miscommunication somewhere. Let's call it that.
Right. There are. Yeah, you're right, though. I mean, and I've had the good fortune of working in the private sector outside. So I've spent some time in between housing authorities in the private sector. And I remember the first time I did, it was such a shock for me. It was like, I'd gotten so used to the very, very kind of relaxed way we approached errors in housing authority world, which kind of like, okay, well, just, fix this here and we'll move this here and it'll be okay. And I got really used to that. And I got the private sector, and I forget, what it was. There was a budget or construction line that had gone over, and I was unprepared entirely for the level of in trouble I was because we had gone over budget. And I was like, I don't understand. Can't we just move? They're like, no, there's no extra money to move. What are you talking about?
Right.
So yeah, but you're right. I mean, housing authorities historically have had the luxury of that consistent federal money, but those days are over.
Right.
We're dealing with, we need to act like private sector entities. We need to be looking at ways to be more efficient and cut costs and increase revenues and not be so dependent on one source of revenue, and really, become private entities that have a public mission.
That's definitely going to take training for the teams, because I think that is, as I would bring people on from the different housing agencies to work with our organization, I had this, table of contents. Basically, I said, here's this, because I understand how they think, and I understand the latitude they would have to the budget overages.
Yeah.
We did it.
Yeah.
This, and we had to be at 98. And my teams had to be at 98, and they had to pass their inspections, and we had to save money, and now it's Inspire, but then it was React, right?
Yeah,
So all these things that you have to do, there's processes and systems in place or that you put in place, and you follow through on, that help with these, overages, or to minimize the overages. And so it's a shocker sometimes. But that is a conversation I had this morning with somebody who went from private to housing agency. And she's like, I don't understand how we're, okay to do this. And I'm like, it's not okay. Do not change your mindset.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do not change your mindset. You keep doing and performing the way you know how to perform, and just keep communicating the purpose and the, you work expeditiously. In the private world, we're like boom, 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 because
Exactly. You gotta
time is
show 'em.
money. Time
Yeah.
is money, and that's what you train your team members to do it right.
Yes.
But you got to be quick. You can't,
Yeah, we
take
don't waste
forever.
time. Yeah, you do it quick, do it right. I don't want to do it twice. Just yeah, and it's such a
There.
different mindset, and it's kind of me when I got into the business back, and it was 2005, 2006, and really I come from the private sector, and so in the private sector finance. So when I got into public sector finance, and I was like, okay, why is this taking so long? Like, does everything move so slowly? Like where I was coming from, everybody was rip and run all day long. You work from 8 to 8, and you just, and get to the house and like, oh, we're taking lunch for an hour and a half. Like, what do you mean? We don't have an hour and a half. I get back to my desk. And the deadlines come and we're like, okay, well, we'll just ask for an extension. What is that? I didn't even know what that was when I got into the business. These are things that I didn't know existed. So being here, I've gotten used to them. I appreciate extensions and I appreciate long lunches, but at the same time, it is critical. And you're right. I love, when I'm able to encourage or hire a private sector person to come into the housing authority, because they bring an energy and a sophistication and a drive that, they want to get it done. They want to get it done now. They don't want to deal with it later. And that's really what this industry needs. And that's not to say that everybody in this industry is that way.
Right.
But, yes, there is a comfort level that we have to sort of get away from, or at least shake a little bit, so that we can, unfortunately, the days of just calling HUD up and saying, oh, we need more, those are over.
Yes.
You got to go get it. You have to be out here hustling and trying to find the money and doing the projects and doing the deals and cutting costs and being aggressive about how we run this business, because that's the only way that we're going to survive.
It is a business plan.
Yeah.
And that is how it needs to be treated, regardless of what it is. I tell people this is a business plan, and we don't have endless amounts of money that come in, and we may get a rental increase, but hey, we've got these expenses. The insurance just went up. The water just went up. The taxes so there's so many things, and taxes is a little different, right? But insurance is insurance.
Yeah.
And it continues to go up, especially on our affordable housing projects, So, and, this morning when I had the conversation, she's like, well, they were talking about we still need 3 bids. I was like, well, you need 3 bids in the private sector too. Like, that's not uncommon.
Right.
Actually need to make sure they have the, apples to apples scope. And
Right.
like, this is keep going and keep doing what you know how to do, because in the grand scheme of things, you got to run a business and you got to run it lean. Operations, it is what it is. You've got compliance, you've got people, you've got people, product. It's all the same. It's just a different business.
Yeah, it really is. And it's gotten so complicated, and I don't think it was I don't know, but I don't think it was always as complicated, and the work wasn't so sophisticated. Now we are doing the exact same things that private market developers doing. We're doing the exact same things that a private market, property manager is doing. So in real terms, you're right. It is the exact same kind of work, which means we need the exact same skill sets. And it also means we need the exact same level of drive and aggressiveness and intentionality. And so you're right.
I'm going to tell you that my HUD site managers had to be savvier than my conventional site managers. And they had to understand what 2% vacancy loss. It wasn't like people just were standing at the door. We did have a wait list.
Yeah.
But you have to work that wait list.
Yep.
You have to get the documents. My conventional site, it was like Zoom document upload, Zoom document upload. Here's my pay stubs.
Yep.
Here's my application. And it was quick, right? Yeah. This one over here takes longer and requires more assistance and more savviness and more patience.
Yeah.
And you have to get people in, because as we all know, regardless of what type of asset you have, vacancy is vacancy.
Yep.
Now, we were able to claim some vacancy loss over here if the unit was ready. But not everybody does that. We were just savvy enough to know how to work that. Yeah. But you don't know how long that's going to continue happening, right? Yeah. That's an area that I feel may go away. But in saying all this, I just think that bringing innovation into the loop, is a great thing. But as I was training this morning. I said, look, you got to meet people where they're at
Yeah,
to bring them where you need them to be,
absolutely.
So with saying that, where do you see the greatest opportunity for innovation in affordable housing is over the next, 5 to 10 years?
Where do I start? Goodness. Um, there's just so many places. You know what? I think the biggest area that stands out the most to me is our lack of adoption of technology. That is the biggest crutch to me at any housing authority I've ever been at. We are usually working with software that is 5 to 10 years outdated, right?
Yes, you are.
Right. And nothing that we have is cloud-based, nothing that we have is mobile, nothing that, so we're constantly dealing with software and processes that are rooted in things that were done 5 to 10 years before where we are, right? So we have, we have Yardi and I don't know, we have Emphasis and other agencies I've been in have Yardi. The reality is, and nothing against either of those software companies, but that's not real page. That's not, all the stuff that people are using today that are in the private sector that, I can pick up my laptop and go anywhere and be able to just work and keep everything flowing. We don't have that. We don't have the cloud-based document imaging. We don't have the apps where our residents can just upload everything and be done with it. We have all these things. We have to have people come in and we have to have them sit down and that's hard for people to do anymore. But they've got a
Right.
phone and they can take a picture of that document and it's the exact same document. So, I still go back to, the reference I made earlier. You can get pretty much an entire mortgage to buy a house on your phone. I'm almost certain you can do the entirety of that process on your phone. Because I know when I did my mortgage for my last house, I only saw people at closing. That was the only time I saw another human being. Everything else was emailed or DocuSign or something like that.
Right.
But we make people, and that's for somebody, myself, I've been blessed. I have the resources to buy a house and have a phone and internet and all this kind of stuff, right? We ask people who have the least to
Yep.
do the most to get a resource that they actually need. It's not like somebody's just choosing this because they want to live over here. This is housing because they need it. So I think
Right.
software and our lack of adoption of modern software in a cohesive, mindful way is a huge, huge, huge missed opportunity. I think the other area where we miss opportunity is in our own ability to leverage and partner and generate revenue, right? We a lot of us, I won't say all, because some housing authorities are actually really good at generating revenue through, building a retail space or leasing space or being more than just a housing authority. I think we all have to stop seeing ourselves as only housing authorities. We are oftentimes, if not always, the largest landlord in any city. There's a lot of leverage and a lot of power that comes with that, and we never use it. We own a lot of times some of the most valuable property in
Yes.
any city. We don't always leverage that. So I really think that's another opportunity for a lot of housing authorities to really assess themselves and say, okay, these are, that old school SWOT analysis. These are the things that we have that are our strengths, that we have these things. These are our opportunities. This is where we need to make some changes. But, we don't always take advantage of the things that are available to us. We are businesses, very large businesses. I mean,
Yes.
what the New York City Housing Authority is over $1 billion. Chicago Housing Authority is over $1 billion. I've worked at, Pittsburgh is 100, probably 200 million a year. If those were private entities, they'd be some of the largest businesses in town. Cities would be excited that they were moving to your headquarters across town. We're not. We don't really own that. We don't tell people. So that's the other thing. I think, we don't do enough around just really looking at what we have and really truly leveraging it. And I think the last thing that I really, really wish more agencies dove into is the marketing and communications piece.
Yes.
We just don't sell it enough. I don't know if we just don't feel like we have to sell it. We just, or, yes, we all have these waiting lists that are a mile long. I get that. But I don't know that people know the work we do. I don't know that people understand just how in their communities we already are. I don't think people get that, your housing authority employee is like the third or fourth largest employer in your community. We're not, we don't do enough around getting people behind us and getting people to know us. I truly strongly believe, a lot of industries have their champions, their people that are they're almost celebrities, influencers, whatever you're calling them, that are out front making those, people know, like, ASCPA or whatever it is, has the people that do the dogs, right? When the commercial comes on, I feel bad for the shelter dogs, or, but they have celebrities and they have influencers, they have people that are telling that story. So we care about those dogs. I want to save every dog on that commercial because they have a commercial and it puts it right in front of my face. We don't do that. And so there's no, we often complain because there's no support for what we do. It's like, but nobody knows what we do. We don't spend any time telling them. We're just happy to have, whatever we've got and keep going. So, I think that's really our, we really have to just become much more savvy about how we tell our own stories. And then, we really have to start being businesses and start letting people know that we're here. And, at the end of the day, the technology just has to catch up. It is unbelievable. Like, there's no reason, like, we have at any housing authority, there's a finance department. Those people don't need to be in the office. They do not need to sit here every day. They could work remotely. That would save us money on office space. The development team. When I worked for Summit Housing Group, I was their Arizona rep. I worked out of my house in Arizona. Their office is in Montana. They saw me quarterly. Like, I flew up for office for a week, a quarter. And it worked. It was very functional. It was a super way to do business. And I've noticed that the smart businesses, that's what they're doing. Because now you can attract the best talent from all over the country. You don't have to pay to move them somewhere. They don't have to move. And all of a sudden, but they're still getting the work done because they've used technology to work to their advantage. So those are the things. I think, there's probably a million other things, but those are the ones that always come to like the top of my mind.
Those are great points. And going back to the people piece of it is making sure that your teams do understand that they are running multi-million-dollar businesses.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I will tell you that for myself, like, I didn't really understand the full value of what I was running and the value I was creating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just for the community, but the asset that in turn impacts the community.
Yeah. Yeah. The economic impact is enormous. Yeah.
It is understanding. I mean, that was probably 15, 20 years ago when that light bulb went on and I was like, whoa, okay. And it was like, okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what kind of value this means. Let's keep moving forward. So at that point, I started training my teams like, hey, you run a multi-million-dollar business. Like, you are not just a property manager or just an accountant. Like, you are looking at a book of business that is worth millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And you need to embrace that power.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always think about it, like, to your point, is like, if a housing authority, if miraculously tomorrow HUD was like, look, you know what? Just all the properties are yours. You do whatever you want to with them. I mean, my goodness, we probably just here in Kansas City, I'm going to guess our portfolio is worth $500 million, $1 billion, maybe more, and you're right. And these are huge businesses. I mean, NYCHA could probably be listed. It could be a public, So yeah, you're right. These are, even small housing authorities have huge portfolios that would be the envy of anybody in property management, but we don't see ourselves that way. And you're right. We need to tell our teams really how big this really is and how much of an important role you play in overseeing this. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Starts with them. And like, we can do all this work on our end. We can create all these great things, but if we don't get them to see the power they hold and how much they actually impact that asset and shift that mindset from it being, a lot of what I see is it's a day-to-day redundancy, but how do you become creative?
Yeah.
How do you help change what has always been to what it could be?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's getting them to start thinking like that. So
it's mindset. That's absolutely mindset first. And it really is. Mindset will change the operations will change the outcome. So yeah, it's you're right. It does start with just getting people to understand the role that they play in this massive entity that we are. You're right. Yeah.
So, well, I know, like, we're already at 58 minutes and I didn't, we're sitting here talking away. I could go on for another hour, but I won't keep you that long. As we wrap up, how can our audience reach out to you or connect with you if
Sure.
they had any questions?
So I am at the Housing Authority of Kansas City. I am, as you mentioned, the development and planning and development director. So you can reach me at the Housing Authority. I should know my number, but I don't. But it's Housing Authority of Kansas City. It's I'd find a business card somewhere else. But you can also just reach me by email. It's probably the easiest way. You call me, I'll probably look at the phone and wait till you left a voicemail. Email is kgregory, Gregory at hakc.org. So that email is easy. I'm not hard to find on LinkedIn. Every now and then I'll make a ridiculous post, so you find me there. I believe it's if you look up Keith Gregory, there aren't a lot of us, so there's that. But also, like I said, just email is the easiest way to find me. I'm super easy to find my email. If you're looking for me outside of work for just a conversation that's unrelated to work, Keith L. Gregory 2, the number 2 at Gmail. I'm easy to find. But I love having conversations. I love just talking affordable housing, talking development, and I love conversations like these. I mean, ma'am, this has been a fun conversation. I love this. I'm actually, had looked at some of the other episodes. I'm gonna have to kind of catalog and go through. I'm gonna add it to my binge watch list, actually. So now
thank you.
I have my shows, and I'll just add this to my watch list. So this has been super fun. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us and providing your insight perspective to our listeners. I always think bringing on people with different backgrounds is great. And I think what you have said today just is, this morning I had a conversation and it kind of just rolled into this. So it's great. Like, it wasn't an accident. I promise you that. We were meant to have this conversation today. To our listeners, remember that affordable housing isn't just about buildings. It's about people, purpose, progress, and building a legacy for future generations. Thank you guys for joining us today, and I'll see you next time.
That's a wrap on this episode of Affordable Foundations, Legacy Impact Through Housing. I hope today's conversation sparked new ideas and gave you a fresh perspective on the role we all play in creating sustainable, thriving communities. Affordable housing isn't just about buildings. It's about people, opportunity, and the legacies we leave behind. Every step we take to improve access, challenge stigmas, and drive solutions brings us closer to a future where everyone has a place to call home. Make sure to subscribe to Affordable Foundations on your favorite podcast platform and share this episode with others who are just as passionate about making a difference. Follow us on social media for more insights, updates, and stories from the field. And before we go, a special shout out to the incredible teams working on the front lines of our multifamily properties. The property managers, maintenance teams, leasing staff, and all those who make housing possible every day. Your work is the foundation of stronger communities, and we see you. We appreciate you, and we thank you. Until next time, let's keep building a legacy that lasts.